I've never talked about anime on my channel before. Let's fix that. Hello and welcome back to Cinema Dissections. In today's video, I'll be cutting open 2016's science fiction anime movie, The Empire of Corpses. Okay, so I believe that every genre has the capacity to offer up an amazing story to tell, and anime's no different. But the majority of anime-related things that I watch regularly do tend to be anime movies specifically. Now, that isn't to say that I don't like series, because they can be great too. I can't even begin to tell you how many times I've watched Black Butler or Soul Eater. In fact, I think Hellsing Ultimate would make a great follow-up to today's topic, which is another anime adaptation and reimagining of classic horror literature. But that's a dissection for another day. Point being, I often favor anime movies more because they tend to take themselves more seriously. They do their own thing instead of following the trend of a group of quirky characters going to a blank school. And you can fill that blank with anything you want, a fight school, a magic school, whatever. And that's not to say that format is bad, i.e. Soul Eater, but it's certainly a really stale trend now. Not to mention that anime movies are less likely to rely on juvenile humor or giant screaming chibi heads, or waste my time with multiple extensive episodes devoted to a character that I don't give a fuck about. Again, these aren't necessarily things that mark a bad anime, they're just really overused by this point. Which brings me to The Empire of Corpses, a movie that doesn't waste a single moment of its runtime with any of that. At the same time, though, it's a movie that I'm fascinated by due to its absolute strangeness. This was a movie that I just picked up on a whim in a Walmart discount bin a few years back, which is not something that I usually do. I almost never buy a physical copy of a movie before seeing it first. Reason being, I prefer to only support things that I know are good and I want to see more of. But something about the art and the description on the back just screamed out that I would love this movie. And I'm so glad I trusted my instincts, because I really do. But okay, what's the plot? Well, let's see if I can somehow put it into words. Imagine the world of Sherlock Holmes, all steampunk and mysterious. Now, remove Sherlock Holmes and make Watson the main character. Still with me? Okay, now set it during the years before Watson met Holmes. Now add zombies. I know, but stay with me on this. Now add in Victor Frankenstein and a handful of historical figures like Thomas Edison, Charles Babbage, Frederick Burnaby, and Ulysses S. Grant. Yeah, this movie is nuts. It sounds exactly like the kind of fanfiction mashup that I would write, huh? But I have to say, all these elements do blend together beautifully well here. Except for Thomas Edison. I think his character would have worked worlds better if he was replaced by Nikola Tesla. Edison was a scumbag who stole all of Tesla's work. Tesla was the real inventor. If anybody would have made an android that was a perfect human analog, it would have been him. But whatever, I guess. On top of that, I've always been a sucker for the steampunk aesthetic. Watching the intricate machinations of the steam-powered machinery and glowing Tesla coils is just so cool to watch. Hell, the name of my channel is a reference to this style. The story of the movie follows John Watson, a medical student living in an alternate history where the living dead are created through scientific means and are a common part of everyday life. They're used as a workforce and form the backbone of this world's economy, used for everything from manual labor and warfare to even the most mundane clerical jobs. This in itself would make for a deeply fascinating movie, enough to build an entire miniseries around. But I've merely scratched the surface here. All of this is made possible by Victor Frankenstein, who invented this method of bringing the dead back to life and making them docile, which involves a mixture of biomechanical engineering and software upgrades using rudimentary punch cards, which they call necroware. These are less like zombies and more like programmed machines wearing a corpse. This is a really creative and fresh approach to zombies, on top of the fact that this could easily be metaphorical for our society and the horrific extent of capitalism. Now, not even death is an escape from your 9 to 5. Don't let this movie's Victorian-era setting fool you. It's commenting on the here and now. And science fiction at its best should always make a statement on the world that we live in. Victor Frankenstein has gone missing, though, along with his notes on how to bring someone back to life with their full consciousness and personality restored. And this is where the story of young Watson here begins. In the opening scene, we see him getting caught by the law after stealing equipment to bring back Friday, someone that he's lost that he deeply cares about. And this movie gives us more insight into their relationship via somewhat homoerotic subtext. And here's where I have to say, I absolutely think that this is a gay romance movie. And for once, the romantic subplot is actually engaging for me. Now, am I biased on that front? Yeah, probably. As a bisexual guy, I can say that gay romance strikes a particular chord with me. But that's just because you so rarely see it done right. And it's done amazingly well here. It's so heartbreaking. And that's not to say that a straight romance doesn't work for me either. Off the top of my head, I can think of like The Doctor and Rose. That really worked for me. But straight couples are kind of a dime a dozen. They have to be done really well for me to care. I know people will probably fight me on this, but I 100% believe that Watson is in love with Friday. You cannot tell me that the way that Watson acts concerning Friday is anything other than romantic love. I mean, the guy broke the law and stole tons of equipment to bring someone back to life, and then spends the rest of the movie relentlessly obsessing over finding Frankenstein's notes in order to restore Friday back to his former self. And part of why it works so well here is because it's not a central focus. It's just background flavor for Watson's character. And that is how you correctly write all forms of romance, in my opinion. Romance should never be center stage because people are compelled by so much more than just one emotion. There is so much more that makes up a human being. Watson isn't just in love. He's a scientist who's fascinated by necroware and corpse technology. He wants to improve and perfect it, become a pioneer of this technology, not just to help the world, but to discover the secrets of life. He's guided by his own internal fears and ambitions. He has dreams and aspirations that extend beyond just being in love with Friday. And in that way, he's a complete character because all his traits blend together seamlessly. And I actually really like that element. It really adds a lot to the story. Just look at the way Watson acts around him. They're in love and it's cute, so just shut up and let me have this. The story is so sad and tragic, and oh my god, this is how Watson got his limp. I'm gonna cry. Anyway, as you can tell, this movie has a lot going on, which is kind of its downfall. Honestly, I would have been happy just sitting back and seeing how a world like this functions. You didn't even have to give me a main character or a story, because a world like this raises so many fascinating questions all on its own. Like, how did this world's economy develop when its workforce doesn't even require payment or food or breaks? How has this method of using the dead affected religion and cultural beliefs? Do people donate their bodies, or is it some kind of random selection? Do the dead have rights of any kind? Or are they just treated like equipment? And the list just goes on and on. Unfortunately, none of these questions get answered really, as this world is merely a backdrop for Watson's story. Which isn't a bad story by any means. Personally, I would just like to have learned more about this society. But as far as Watson's story goes, I don't really want to say too much about it. This movie has mostly gone unnoticed by everyone, so I don't really want to spoil it because I would prefer that you just go watch it. It's such a great film that asks lots of interesting questions, like, what is a human soul and does it really exist? What makes us who we are as people, the mind or the soul, the scientific or the spiritual? Is the concept of a soul merely an antiquated idea from humanity's religious past? Or can something that was previously considered divine be recreated scientifically? These are all questions that are asked, but the movie doesn't seem to really want to explore them that deeply. One thing I will say though is that throughout the movie, and especially towards the end, it tends to go over my head and just generally fall apart. Honestly, the entire movie's a bit hard to follow, and only upon many viewings could I manage to describe it here as accurately as I am. In that way, it feels like a miniseries crammed into a feature-length film. This film moves at such a blistering pace, never stopping or slowing down or letting the scenes breathe, and always moving on to the next scene, sometimes even making huge jumps forward in time. And something else that I kept thinking throughout the film was that it felt like parts of it were lost in translation. Take this scene for example.
They're shooting at us? Right, and you know what that means? We're not the only ones after the treasure.
Treasure? What treasure? What the hell are you talking about? Frankenstein's notes? If so, why did you say it like that? That's so confusing. This scene just started a few moments ago, having just glossed over several months after Watson's arrest without so much as a word, and here you are talking about a treasure for the first and last time in the movie. Well, after the chase sequence, we're then shown a scene from that time jump, and it just makes you ask, why did we jump ahead so far just to flash back to the time that you chose to skip? It just feels like the movie's out of chronological order. Why are we seeing the context for this scene after seeing it play out? So the editing choices for this film don't help much either. But okay, fine. What about this scene?
Noble Savage 007. That's Friday's registration name, as property of Walsingham.
Who's Walsingham?
Walsingham. Him, is it?
Oh, that's right. It's this character who introduced himself as M.
You may call me M. It's high time you do some work for me, John Watson, and for the British Empire.
So no wonder I was confused. That's not made clear to the audience until practically the end of the movie. So the whole time you're just left wondering who the fuck Walsingham is. It's like they forgot to tell the audience that M had an alias, and then they make this same mistake with another character later. You just hear these alternate names floating around and you never know who they're referring to. The writing tries to spin it to you like it's some kind of twist reveal, but it really doesn't work because all the other characters seem to already know who all these names are associated with. It's the audience who's left in the dark here, and it just makes things more confusing than they need to be. And there's lots of strange moments like these that are just sprinkled all throughout the film. Peculiar moments where their choice of words just lose you completely. And here's my theory as to why. This movie started out originally as a book released in Japan under the same name, except, probably in Japanese. And much like Watson obsessively searching for Frankenstein's notes, I need to find an English copy of this book. But I can't find an English translation anywhere on the internet. I feel like this is the key to understanding this film, because so much of it is lost on me. Because you know that any movie adapted from a book has lots of crucial stuff cut out of it for seemingly no reason by people who think they know better. And that's why I think this movie confuses me so much. Crucial pieces of information are probably missing. Like, who is this guy? He says he's called M, which I always assumed stood for Moriarty, but it could also stand for Holmes' brother, Mycroft. But hell, Wikipedia says it could be M from James Bond, as if that makes more sense. And Friday, whose name is ripped from Robinson Crusoe, shares no connection to that story aside from the fact that Watson uses him as his personal assistant. So why name him after some random character from a different book? Did Watson read the story and take inspiration from it, or is this supposed to be literally the same Friday from Robinson Crusoe? How are you supposed to tell which fictional literary characters from other stories are real in this world? Who is real and who's just a fictional character within the universe? And, most importantly of all, who is this dude and why are his eyebrows so threatening? And don't even get me started on that mustache. Not everyone can rock a mustache, and that's okay. You just have to accept it. Take it from me, I give it a shot every time I have to shave, and I just end up looking like I should be on a registry. But, in all honesty, I'm just starting to think that I'm not well educated enough to fully grasp this film. Because, while researching for this video, I discovered that this character here, Alexei Karamazov, whose character in this movie has read Frankenstein's notes and learns from them a horrible truth that is driving him insane in classic Lovecraft fashion, is actually a character ripped from something called The Brothers Karamazov, which is a Russian novel that actually sounds like a really good read. I'm gonna have to check that out. But as you can tell, unless you're very literary, you won't totally understand everything this movie's doing. Hell, I don't understand everything this movie's doing. All of this is hilarious too, because I feel like this movie's portrayal of Frankenstein's monster is the most accurate depiction I've ever seen. He's intelligent, wise, driven. He's an actual character. And there's even a cameo by the Universal Pictures version of Frankenstein. Who knew that all it took was an anime adaptation of someone's fan fiction to give us everything that we ever wanted? Obviously, there is so much to praise about this movie. The story may have some minor hurdles, but the things it gets right are perfect. But even on a technical level, this movie is stunningly beautiful, and it's so easy to just sit back and get wrapped up in the stylistic atmosphere. It's so out there, but that's what I love about it. Plus, it makes a brilliant horror film, because it does what I believe every great horror movie should do. It has a relatable source of horror. It taps into that existential terror that we all have concerning death and the concept of the afterlife and the unknown itself. It's very Lovecraftian in that way. Speaking of which, it actually feels like a distant relative to the Reanimator films, right down to the fact that the 21-gram weight loss upon death plays an important part in this movie too. When small pieces of reality bleed through into science fiction, it just hits so much harder. That is sci-fi at its strongest, a genre that carries itself based on its relativity to reality. And the soundtrack accompanying this film is just gorgeous. It's so moody and brooding, it's perfect for this film. Here, have a listen. Honestly, I may not understand everything this movie is doing, and I may not get all its references, but I love this movie's gusto. It knows what it wants to be and what it wants to do and simply does it. It may not give many answers, and it may be wrapped in a riddle-like dialogue, but personally, I think that it's just as important to ask a question or a riddle than to force an attempt to answer it. You don't have to have the answers, just the bravery to ask the big questions. What is the meaning of life? What's the point of war? What makes you who you are? What are you truly willing to sacrifice for those that you love? This film asks these questions, and while it doesn't answer them, I think that's enough. Asking the questions is important enough in itself. It's all I could ask for, really. So kudos to you, Empire of Corpses. This is a film that certainly has my respect, and I can assure you, I'll be watching it many more times in the future. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to hit that bell down there. It would really help out the channel. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this movie in the comments below. But, as always, thanks for watching.